Hello my quilting friends! Leah Day here with a new collaboration video. My good quilting friend Christa Watson from ChristaQuilts.com has just sent me a mini quilt. And it's a really beautiful quilt filled with her new fabrics. So let's check it out and create a plan for how we're going to quilt it. So check out the mini that Christa sent me. This is made with all of her beautiful fabrics that she's just designed and recently released. So this is really exciting to be able to quilt it. But there is a pretty obvious challenge, and I'm sure that you spotted it, and that is this is pretty bold fabric. A lot of prints, and even the background is a little complex. You know, these are blenders, but they're still a little complex. Just to, put anything on top of this, you're really not going to see it. And there's also a little bit of a time crunch. Got to be honest, I need to get this done today. So how do you quilt something that's a little bit on the busy side when there's a lot of fabrics involved and you need to get it done quickly? Well, the number one thing that I'm looking at is I love her bold fabrics, and I really want those to stand out nicely. And some of these background prints can stand out just a little bit much. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to push that background down and stitch that so that it recedes and her fabrics come up to the surface. I might even pick some of these prints to stitch over as well, just to de-emphasize them so I can bring up some others. And then I've also basted it with this really fluffy wool batting so that if I stitch densely, then some areas are going to naturally puff up. Now I don't want to stitch it super dense because obviously that's going to take a lot of time. So I think I'm going to pick a really simple, fast free motion quilting design. It's called Underwater Rocks, and it's basically messy circles. I'm going to stitch it over it. It's going to densely fill that background. That's going to cause that to flatten out and kind of lift up and elevate her fabrics. I think that's the best choice. Let's get on the machine and see how it works in free motion. So I stitched in the ditch around this area, and now I'm filling it with underwater rocks. So basically this is just messy pebbling. I stitch a circle or a half circle shape, whatever I can fit into the area, and then just keep swinging around and around, and I try and make it messy. Sometimes my travel stitching, I accidentally stitch right over the same spot over and over again, but really what I'm aiming for is a messy echo, as you can see right here. Just swinging around it. In those little tight areas, try and fill in the biggest shape I can fit, even if it's not a whole circle shape. Okay, work my way out and swing around again. Now, notice that my stitches can tend to get a little bit big, and that's because I'm moving my hand so quickly. I can either put down my foot, and that's increasing the speed of my machine, that works, or I can consciously slow down my hands, which sometimes is a little harder for me. So generally what I do is put my foot down and increase the speed of my machine. That way my stitches stay nice and small and secure, and they don't get too big. I personally don't like really big chunky stitches on my quilt. I like them to stay pretty small, but that's really a personal preference. You know, it really changes the look. It depends on what you like to see on your quilts. So sometimes when I'm stitching over this, I am quilting with some gray thread, and it's really, really thin gray thread, so it's hard to see it when I'm stitching over these gray fabrics. And it's not really going to show up much on the surface other than just coming out as texture. You're going to kind of be able to see it subtly, depending on the light that's shining across the quilt. But it's really not going to be a very eye-catching design, and the main reason for that is these fabrics are just so bright and bold already. Now I just noticed I got a thread break here, so I'm going to stop and tie that off and keep on going. So I tied it off and buried those thread tails, and how I was able to know that the thread broke, because it really wasn't very obvious, is I heard it. I heard it like a little ping, and listen back in the video and see if you can catch it too. And then I saw the thread was kind of snarled up around my needle, which meant that it had started to split, and then the needle moving up and down had just kind of formed a knot in the thread. And this is one of those things, whenever you hear a weird noise on your machine, any kind of weird noise, that is a signal to stop, check things out, see what's going on. I could probably have kept stitching, and that's, you know, certainly something that I used to do. I would hear something and then be like, oh, let's just see if I can keep pushing that pedal and it'll keep going. You know, unless the needle actually came unthreaded, I wasn't going to stop. And what I found over time was doing that was a real mistake. I usually was a bird's nest or a thread break, something that was really pretty ugly on the back of the quilt, and it really needed to be taken care of. So I learned the hard way, you know, really needed to develop a habit to stop and check, deal with things as they come, and get back on track on the right foot. So I encourage you, if you hear a bad noise means stop, check things out, and get going again. I am testing a different kind of thread with this video. This is not my typical isocord. And you know, every thread has a different personality, and this is much thinner. It's, you know, definitely a more delicate thread, and I can already tell you it's not my favorite. You know, I need a thread that's rugged, that's going to take the pressure and just the heat of free motion quilting, you know, how I stitch back and forth over my stitching several times. Sometimes I stitch in weird directions. I need a thread that's able to do all of those things. And if it starts to break even 2 or 3 times in a small quilt like this, that to me says it probably isn't going to be a good choice for the long run. And everybody has a different standard for that. I'm fairly picky. I don't like to stop and break thread and have to deal with a thread break. I really like to get in the rhythm of quilting and be able to keep going. And it annoys me, like teeth gritting annoying, when my thread breaks. So for that alone, I probably won't ever buy another spool of this thread. I'm not going to tell you what it is, because you know, obviously everybody has a different experience, and you just got to try a lot of different things and see what works for you. On a different machine, this thread might work entirely differently, and I don't want you to give you a negative impression that's just based off of, you know, my one experience today working on this one quilt. So here I'm coming up and I've got this gray section, and I've already got some stitching done right here, and I'm kind of matching up with that. And I'm trying not to form pleats or puckers in the quilt, but you know, it is pretty poofy. There's a lot of excess fabric here. So as I swing around, I'm going to try and fill up this entire space in one circle. The nice thing is this is not, you know, regular pebbling, so it doesn't have to be neat and tidy. I can overlap these lines, and that's a-okay, because that's the rule of this design. It's allowed to be messy. And that's another thing, if you're ever quilting a design and it's just too tedious and too time consuming, and it's just driving you crazy with the perfection of it, change it up and make it sloppy. You know, no one said that you don't, you know, you can't do it that way. You can't just stitch more sloppy echoes and keep on moving a little faster. So one thing I broke up with this other section is I did a little bit of echo stitching just to kind of break it up a little bit and make it more interesting. So I think that's what I'm going to do. So I'm just going to stitch a curvy echo through here. I'm echoing around the edge of those pebbles. Kind of dip in here. I've got a little narrow space. Run right up against that ditch. Now I'm going to travel stitch over about a little bit less than 1/8 of an inch, maybe a little bit more than 1/8 of an inch. Doesn't really matter. And then I'm going to echo again. And the hard thing is I can barely see this thread. I don't even know where I was stitching. There we go. I can kind of sort of see it. So this is matching nearly perfectly with that gray background. And I rarely match thread color to fabric color because it does actually feel like I've gone blind. I just can't really see what I'm doing, and I don't like that. I like to be able to see what I'm doing, and I like that contrast, so that way you're better able to see the, you know, quilting design I've bothered to stitch on the quilt. But every quilt, like I said, has a personality, and I really think that this was a good choice, and it's worth, you know, kind of squinting and slowing down a little bit here just to get it stitched out nicely. So I've got a little bit of area here. I'm just going to fill that in with one more echo, fill in this space as well, and then I'm just going to knock out the rest of that area with more underwater rocks. We've just got a little bit here and a little bit there, and that space will be done. So I've moved to the other side of the quilt. This is right on the edge, and I'm just stitching in the ditch between those beautiful print fabrics and this background. So just slow and careful stitching as I make my way through that area. And then I've decided to fill these sides with just a straight line echo. So I'm just coming up and echoing a little bit bigger than 1/8 of an inch away. Fills up the space really quickly so I can just flow through that whole area. Now you gotta watch out for it whenever you have a line of fabric that comes down. So that kind of breaks this area into one little chunk. So I'm just gonna stitch back and forth, filling in this little spot with echoes. So just straight lines, sharp angles. So focus on those nice right angles as I make those turns. And notice how I'm not rotating the quilt. I find that it's sometimes easier just to leave it in one position and just flow through that area with careful control. And that just comes with practice. You know, I certainly wasn't able to quilt that easily when I first got started, but this is a really simple straight line design. But notice how I'm not being super picky with it. I mean, my lines are a little bit wobbly, you know, they're kind of angled a little weird. That's okay. The point is not perfection. The point is to fill that space with beautiful straight line texture. And here's what it looks like whenever it was finished. So here is Christa's finished quilt, and I love how this came out. I really think that this helped emphasize her beautiful fabrics. They're kind of poofy on the surface now. The background is definitely the background, and you do have to get up pretty close to the quilt in order to see my stitching, and I think that's okay. Not everything in a quilt can be the focal point. You need to pick one or two things. In this case, it's the beautiful piecing and it's the beautiful fabrics. The quilting is definitely secondary, and that's all right. I really enjoyed quilting it. It was very simple, very fast design, got me moving and grooving today, and that was really enjoyable for me. I think the only thing that I would probably have done differently on this quilt is I probably would have gone with white thread, so that way as I stitched, it maybe built up on that gray fabric just a little bit more so I could see what I was doing a little bit better. You know, I was playing with a different thread today and experimenting with that. And, you know, it's really good to try new things, but at the same time, also err on what you know and what you're used to using, so that way you know exactly how it's going to work on the quilt. I had about 3 or 4 extra thread breaks on this quilt that I know I wouldn't have had if I'd been using my favorite Isacord thread instead. So I hope that you enjoyed this collaboration and you learned something new about machine quilting. Please go check out Christa's website, ChristaQuilts.com, where you can find beautiful fabrics, tools, supplies, and her awesome books on machine quilting. So definitely go check that out. And while you're online, also go check out my website, leahday.com, where you'll find a totally different variety of things to help you with machine quilting as well. So Christa and I really kind of occupy the same space, but we do it in different ways. And I love quilting along with her. So I hope that you enjoyed this collaboration as much as I did. Until next time, let's go quilt.